Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and these two bins that you see here in front of us, they're labeled with ANC. That stands for African Nightcrawler. If you get even closer, you can see there's a little thing in parentheses there. Crazy Worm Lady is what that means, CWL. Emily the Crazy Worm Lady is another worm channel, if you've ever seen it. But a lot of you probably have seen the Crazy Worm Lady channel. She's got tons of great content out there. She's been offline for a couple of years. But when she was still making videos, she also sold worms. And the African nightcrawlers that I have here came to me originally as cocoons, and I didn't really take a great deal of care in keeping them isolated from other worms. So I've often wondered if I even really have African nightcrawlers here, but I like to just stick to the story, and that's what I like to think that these are, even if they're not. These are now 32 days of age in these bins. And we actually fed them 3 times now already over that time. 10 days since the last feeding. They got a lot of really good stuff. They got a whole bunch of pumpkin. And I've actually got more pumpkin for them today, in addition to a couple other things. So we're going to get these up on the bench. I'll slip on a glove, and we'll get to feeding them. Oftentimes new bins like this are covered with plastic so that they can remain really damp all the way through and through, even on the top surface, like here where it's kind of dry. But here we opted to just go with paper coverings, so having a somewhat dry top surface is deliberate in a way. Not because that's the end goal. The end goal is really better airflow. But that's kind of just a byproduct of that. And I guess since we've provided them with a pretty tremendous amount of bedding already, down underneath the dry stuff, they're not going to need to rely on this stuff. This stuff here is the way I like to think of what's sitting out here on the surface. It's always kind of like the stuff put out there for next time. To really kind of let it take on the essence of the bin, let the microbial life really get into it, so that by the time the worms get it today, as the bedding that goes hand in hand with their feeding, it'll be stuff that's really going to hit the ground running as far as the worms being able to utilize it and nibble on it. And up until now, they've been able to nibble on stuff down lower, but now they're going to have a chance at having some of this too. Just more of the same, but it's probably needed to a certain point. A lot of the stuff they've had for a while now, for the past month, might already be partially broken down. I guess for a 32-day-old bin, you wouldn't expect a whole lot of activity yet. Well, I know, that's not true. I guess it depends on how many worms you got here. I think the number of worms that we estimated these systems to have, oddly enough, it's sort of sticking in my head because I just looked at the spreadsheet earlier. The estimated population in my systems is usually an average of what all my viewers think they saw as far as how many worms were used to launch the system at launch start time. And here, with everyone's help, we kind of estimated the population of this system to be 1,765 worms. How accurate or inaccurate that is, I don't know. Now, I guess it's ringing a bell now that I see it, because in the previous video, there was only one thing that kind of made me wonder, which was the presence of some green in the bins. But I believe that the presence of the green that we observed was actually in bin number 2, and this is bin number 1. So I'm wondering if, we didn't see it here, so I'm just wondering if it's sort of making its rounds, whatever it is. So here, let's do this. Sometimes I'll actually pull out all this top covering bedding in preparation for this maintenance, because it gives me a little bit more room to work. Here we're just going to try to work around the big piles. And the big piles are going to be integral for the setup of the feeding area today. I do remember making a comment last time that said we'd come in here over the course of the next few days, I guess. I had sort of planned to come back in here after only a few days just to see how moisture is doing in here. I never followed through on that. Kind of a broken promise to the worms. Sorry, worms. But I'm glad to see that down low the material's pretty good as far as moisture content goes. I am starting to get the sense that I'm probably going to have to get my water bottle out here and help some of this stuff regain some of its moisture level. I'm starting to question whether I want to continue with the paper coverings on here, especially if I'm going to be forgetful about making sure to check in to verify moisture levels remaining suitable for the worms. I'm assuming that at this point we're going to find worms only at the very lower reaches of the system, because everything we've encountered so far working our way down has been possibly a little bit too dry for them. So I'm really hoping we haven't created a really overly harsh situation for these little guys. Alrighty, well, even though there's a lot of nice bedding in here that was thrown in for them last time, you can see little remnants, I believe, even of maybe some grit. I'm not sure if we're going to see any pumpkin from the last feeding. Oh, I spoke too soon. I guess I was feeling around for something that might be a little bit soft and mushy. This piece might have just evaded being eaten because it was laying up against something or whatever the case may be, I don't know. But it's a little bit unusual. After 10 days, the last thing you would expect to find in a worm bin is leftovers of pumpkin. So I'm starting to worry a little bit that we've just allowed things to get a little bit too dry here. So I'm thinking as we rebuild, we're going to get my water bottle out here and start squirting this thing down and possibly even send it in the opposite direction at this point, just to make sure that there's really an ample amount of moisture throughout this system for these little guys. I don't want them to be uncomfortable. You know, they need moisture. Without it, they can't breathe. And I really feel bad when I, find my wormies limited on the amount of damp material that they could reside in. Because then they got to really go looking around for stuff that's going to be comfortable for them. All right. Pumpkin stem. All right, I'm going to really quick get my water bottle up here on the bench, and we're going to proceed. I took a moment there to also pump up the pressure in the water bottle, so hopefully we can just now spray with it. Couldn't remember if I had put it away with pressure, but it seemed like we could just give it a few pumps just to make sure it's not going to slow us down. And you're probably wondering, hey, you got your high capacity water bottle all pumped up, ready to go on the side. Why are you squirting? Why are you pumping with your fingers? Well, this is slightly different water. This ain't just straight water. This is water that I've treated with that mosquito dunks stuff that you put in your outdoor pond or your fountain or your any sort of place where you're expecting standing water on your property where you don't want to have mosquitoes breeding. I mean, they'll breed and they'll put their eggs in there, but I think the larvae that come out of their eggs are somehow messed up by the whatever bacteria the mosquito dunks is. Don't ask me to pronounce it. It's some sort of long, like 8 or 10 syllable, multi-word concoction of bacteria, stuff that actually exists in nature. And like when townships want to control mosquito populations in the summer, they'll actually drive through town with a truck that emits the stuff in spray form out into the neighborhood, so it's completely safe. I don't think they'd be spraying neighborhoods with the stuff if it wasn't. Alright, so I might have piled this in here a little bit thick. Let me try to spread this out because I still want to come in here with the moisture as we go. Make sure we don't leave this situation down here the way we found it, which is too dry. I'm also kind of still hoping that by the time we finish here and we have a chance to actually make our way to the outer edges of the system, maybe we'll find some slightly more wet material there. And you're probably wondering, why would you think it would be more damp there? And I'll tell you why. I don't know. It's only because I felt like that green stuff that we noticed might have been a mold that was possibly utilizing the moisture down here in the feeding area, making it too dry for the worms to enter. So the mold did fine down there, but it also left behind, I think, fairly dry, a dry environment, way too dry and harsh for the worms to handle. So it didn't seem to me like this stuff was going to trickle down as quickly as I had hoped, so I thought maybe just a little agitation here at this point to blend in what's on the top. And you can see how quickly this thing's dispensing water, right? If I just hold it here in my hand, I've already got a handful of water right there. So I am pumping a good bit of water down here, and a lot of it's probably just going to sit on the bottom of the bin, which is fine too. I guess if you're going to run a system without any plastic coverings and really allow it to possibly evaporate, could really end up with a situation the worms aren't going to like. Alright, I am questioning adding bedding to the feeding area since we have so much, you know, primed and seasoned stuff to use. So I think at the end maybe we'll add a little bit just as sort of a top covering or something, but everything we're going to throw down here in the food area for them is going to consist of all this existing old stuff. So just what they're getting here, you probably recognize the majority of it. Strawberries went in, some pumpkin went in, a couple corn cobs, and these little mini rolls. Did I bring anything else for them? I think that covers it. I'm trying to remember what the portion was though. I tried to be fair, so I think I had counted 4 pumpkin pieces, 2 corn cob pieces, and 1 roll, as well as maybe a handful of strawberry for each system. I think we've done a good job divvying it out fairly. Don't want to forget to return our leftovers either, so they can continue. Okay, very nice. Start bringing in some of this somewhat dry stuff from the side. We'll give it a little bit more moisture. Luckily, the stuff that's going right around this stuff, especially the stuff that's going to be near the pumpkin or near those strawberries, that stuff's going to get a good bit of moisture from the thawing foods. But I'm still suspicious of the mold or the green stuff that we saw. I'm always going to think that that stuff's going to come in and steal their moisture. So it might make good sense to make sure we don't allow too much time to pass before we do check-ins on this system. Really quick though, let's just see how these outer edges of the system are doing. I guess now it's not a really pure look at how it was before we got here, because we did spray a bunch of liquid, and I think some of the moisture we're already seeing is just seeping over from us having watered the middle feeding area. But it does feel nice and cool and damp. They're really puny. I thought I saw a couple cocoons too along the way. So since it did seem like a good high concentration of castings down in there already, I like to blend in a little bit of bedding there too. Hey, if the worms are going to hang out over there, might as well put stuff out there that they can nibble on while they're there. Why have it all castings, right? Okay, things are looking pretty good. I guess we can sort of restore a level top on this side, but let's make sure we go ahead and be generous with the moisture. I am contemplating here whether I want to maybe upgrade to plastic. I don't know, I shouldn't use the word upgrade when it comes to plastic. Usually I refer to the upgrade as when I get to finally remove the plastic and I don't feel the need to rely on it so much. So whatever. Maybe it's just the optimist in me wants to call the addition of plastic coverings as well as the removal of plastic coverings both upgrades. And they probably both are, right? Because it's really just a progression of the bin's setup in the direction that it needs at the present time. So perhaps it's not something that gets decided to be an upgrade or not. Depending on what it is, it's maybe more dependent on how it's being applied. All right, really quick, just before we end up making this into an hour-long video, let's see how things on this edge look. Similar, very nice. Nice crumbly castings, not too dry over here, luckily. Just the mold goes where the food is. So on these outskirts, it's really just leftover bedding and stuff that I like to blend in usually. A lot of food doesn't really get placed into the outskirts. But a lot of nice castings pile up out there. And the worms like to be there, so I like to blend in leftover bedding for them. Things look really good. I like it. I like it. The green stuff, who knows what it is. Looks a lot like what we saw in the previous check-in, but we saw it in the other bin as far as I remember. Unless we did some sort of a switcheroo. Maybe we fed bin number 2 first. I don't know. I thought it was in the second bin that we had fed last time where I had noticed it, but I did really breeze through the video last time just to give myself a brief refresher on what was fed and how things looked. Were there any significant things? And the only thing I remember at the end was the notation about maybe wanting to come in here more frequently than just the next check-in to make sure things are okay from a moisture perspective. What do we do? Did I put in enough moisture that I don't have to sweat it? Why don't we just take a little leap of faith and say yes? Oops. I just upgraded them to a brand new feeding zone indicator when they don't even really need one. Let them stick with the old one. And, you know, something else before we finish. Let's give this thing a nice top covering. Something we can use next time. I haven't got much. I'll need to go outside and replenish my supply. So I'm going to be careful not to overdo it. But I always like to throw a little something in on the top surface. A little bit of a covering. And here, since it's not all covered with plastic like in a lot of my other systems, it's really not going to see a lot of action. It's just going to kind of sit out here. I guess that might be the same thing if I were to sprinkle some worm chow out on the top surface, but I'm going to try it anyway. I got some advice from one of my viewers about the use of worm chow, various pitfalls, and it's in the comments section, so I mean, it's not like the guy gave me a phone call. You know, we conversed in the comments section of my videos. I just wish I can, maybe I'll put a link in the corner to drive you back to that video. Forgetful me will probably forget to put the link out there. So if I did forget, then please tell me to figure out which video that was where we had that really nice dialogue about the use of worm chow and some of the possible things you can encounter with it. Not good things. So it does help to know more, because it'll just better prepare you for encounters with various things in the future. So that's bin number 1. Let's get bin number 2 out here. All right, yep, here it is. Bin number 2. And it is in a slightly smaller container than bin number 1. Slightly smaller capacity. I think the only major difference, same depth, same length. I think it's just this one's not quite as wide. I mean, that's, at least from my point of view, there's not a lot of difference, really. It's not like I'm trying to fill each one right up to the brim and then the maybe 1 gallon capacity difference would make the difference or whatever. It's really makes no difference at all. In fact, these actually fit onto my shelves a little bit better, these slightly smaller ones. I could put 3 side by side on my shelving system of these, but once I try to incorporate the use of a wider one of those bins, like what's in what bin number 1 is in, I need to prop it up onto something so that these rims can kind of overlap next to each other, because otherwise they bump in and don't let each other fit. So I always find it so much easier to handle bin number 2 when I'm doing pairs like this, because bin number 1 sort of reorients me to what was going on last time and gives me also a slight sneak preview of what to expect in the second system. Obviously, it's not going to be a perfect predictor of what to expect, but it's fair to expect that you'll see good amounts of similarities. And obviously, once in a while, there'll be deviations, and one or the other will throw you a little loop. But I also like to try to think about the differences, you know. So in theory, they are, you know, going to be very similar, if not identical, based on very similar upkeep. But once in a while, something slips in there, whatever the reason, and things go a little bit, I don't know, different. Because, you know, it's not always things going haywire, things going bad. Sometimes all of a sudden, things look really good for whatever reason. And then it's not troubleshooting. It's more like trying to figure out what part of that productive bin is worth copying in other systems to get the same positive, successful results. It's kind of cool. Little plant growing, but the way it created that spiral shape is interesting. All right, so like we did last time, we're going to, a little spider. We're going to give them some yummy foods. Just from a consistency perspective, I feel like I'm just going to start piling on a little bit of water into the lower reaches of the system. And, oh, let's not forget, I hid it from myself, so I've got to reach over there to get it. Although I'm not really seeing a prevalence of them here in this bin. This is one of my newer systems, and I assume that my newer systems don't have the BTI living in them as densely as my established systems that were all set up at a time when I was using the BTI very regularly. When that last batch ran out and all my flying insect issues were pretty much resolved, I didn't bother replenishing my supply. But I did notice in a couple of my newer systems how we were starting to see a little bit of activity. So it seemed to make sense to try to get ahead of the curve on that and start applying this stuff so that the few that we saw would be some of the last. Any other leftovers? Okay, let's grab some of this nice recycled stuff. Let's see if we can stack things a little bit higher and open the gap. Make some nice room down here for all this seasoned bedding to get put in alongside the delicious foods that they're going to be getting. And then it really gives all that bedding a good chance at being broken down too, with all the worm traffic going around it. Before I put the food in though, I think more dampness is going to be needed. Definitely not as dry as we found in the other system. Luckily, that mold, that green stuff, I didn't really see a sign of it. I mean, maybe when I'm editing the video I'll spot it, or maybe someone will see it. But I'm thinking that maybe it was in here and it kind of came and went, and then over there it just hadn't really grown big enough to be seen, but it was probably there already too. And they just both sort of got to that very clearly visible, easily seen stage at different points of time. But whatever. I'm just glad that it's not prevailing or causing issues. I guess the only issue to be noted though is the fact that it did seem to suck up the moisture all to itself, leaving the feeding zone pretty desolate when we came back in here. Seems like these little guys are getting extra strawberry, doesn't it? Maybe that's the advantage to being the second system. Maybe the attempt to preserve enough to make it a fair split is sometimes just enough to give you the advantage of getting a little bit more. Did we put in grit in the previous bin? I don't remember. I know we put the worm chow across the top, but the grit that I use is pulverized eggshell, and it you know, it's not the only grit that you can give your worms. I mean, they need grit to help break down the foods that they eat. But if you have sand, that works just as good. Use that. Or some people like to pulverize crustacean shells. Maybe eat a lot of seafood. So whatever it is that you got handy, depending on where you live or what you do, you just use whatever you got, you know. That's how I am, you know. I'm not going to go out of my way to suit the needs of my worms. The worms are here to suit my needs, and my needs are simply to get rid of my compostable stuff. And I like to treat them almost like a utility, you know. So, you know what? Let's not tidy up yet. I guess we still want to give ourselves a quick little peek at how things on the outer edges here look. Hopefully, much the same as we saw in the other bin, and it is. I see lots of pilings. Take two. I see a lot of castings piling up, and that's when I like to try to throw a little bit of bedding in there to help mix it in, but it is kind of dry, so I don't want to put it in there dry. Let's add moisture over here. I think we had already dampened a lot of the stuff we put into the outer edges and mixed into the bedding previously in the other system, so we didn't have to spray the outer edges because what was going in was already nice and damp. But here it wasn't quite dampened yet, so maybe it's something else we could do. I feel the pressure starting to dwindle. But I think we're going to have enough to get the job done. Alright, that feels nice. In a newer system like this, the worms are going to appreciate having a good bit of moisture, especially if the surface gets harsh due to, you know, flimsy coverings that don't hold on to moisture. As long as we're going to have a system that for a while is going to have a somewhat you know, desolate top surface due to the somewhat drier consistency of it. We want to make sure the lower levels are comfortable for them. So this side seemed to have a lot more, you know, bedding mixed in with the castings and far fewer worms, and I believe it is because it felt a lot drier than the other side. So interesting, you know. To me it seemed like the dryness in the other bin was focused in the feeding area, but I think that was due to the mold. And here it seems like the dryness was happening more on the outskirts, away from where the feeding had been placed, and that was kind of where I had expected the dryness in both bins to be. The mold can always kind of steer things one way or another. It's got its own needs, and if it wants to grow and thrive, it might have to rob resources from the worms you're trying to raise. So you got to be careful, you know, make sure the worms don't end up getting shortchanged on the things they need to survive, because you can come in one day and have a real unhappy scene on your hands down in your worm bin. So I guess giving them a couple pieces of bread like we did here is probably going to help exacerbate the problem, right? more starchy stuff for the mold to go crazy on. Luckily it's not a big hard roll, it's just a little tiny mini roll. And I don't know why, it just feels like a little bit more wouldn't hurt. And I'm not going to do what I did last week. I'm not going to promise myself that I'm going to check in here again, because I probably won't. I guess perhaps because of this fairly generous dampening of things, it might be very similar to the way we found it here today next time. And it's not optimal, but I like to try different things, you know. Even though my routine would normally say put plastic, preserve the moisture, sometimes I like to just turn the screws a little bit. Throw in a different variable once in a while just to see what things are like. I'm not on any sort of aggressive timetable. I'm not trying to produce castings here at a wicked rate. I just want to have places where I could put my compostable materials to get rid of them, so I don't have to dump them in the trash. And the worms help me do that. So I don't try to push it. I got plenty of places I could put my things, and even if it's going to take a while between check-ins, these worms always have plenty of bedding to nibble on if they're not getting fresh kitchen scraps from me on a regular basis. But that never happens. I'm always in here on a regular basis, but things can change in a hurry, so you never know. Luckily worms are easy to raise and keep, and yeah, you know that. If you're watching this, then you're probably a worm farmer of your own, and you already know this stuff. But it's always fun to check out other people's worms, right? That's why you're here. And I am glad you're here. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. And if you made it this long into the end of the video, that's awesome. Hopefully you liked it enough to give it a thumbs up. If you did, please do so now. And also, please also consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so yet. It's all very much appreciated. And that's it for today. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks again for watching. Bye now. I guess it wouldn't be me if I didn't forget something, right? I'll take care of giving them the leaves that I promised. I don't want them to be shortchanged. All right. Talk to you later, everyone. Thanks again for watching. Bye now. I know. Worm chow too. I'll give them some of that too. Thanks again, everyone.